The awakening of a lost soul. The rain poured from the sky like tears from the gods. Somewhere far from the world he knew. Elias opened his eyes. He didn't see the ceiling of his small apartment. No alarm clock beeped, no soft mattress supported his back. Instead, there was the strong smell of wet earth, burning wood, and iron. A loud crack of thunder echoed above, and heavy wind pushed against thick wooden walls. He sat up slowly, confused, his body heavy and unfamiliar. The room was dim. A large fire burned in a pit in the center. Shadows danced on the walls. Furs covered the floor, and axes hung beside a tall wooden door. The clothes on his body weren't his. He wore thick, rough leather, fur-lined boots, and a cloak that smelled of smoke and sweat. Elias touched his chest. It felt strong. His arms were thick with muscle. When he stood, his height shocked him. He was taller, broader. His hands, once soft and calm, were now scarred and calloused. "What is this?" he whispered. But the voice that came out was deep, too deep. Didn't sound like him. Suddenly the door burst open. A man ran inside, wide-eyed and breathing hard. He looked at Elias and froze. "Ulfric," the man said, his voice trembling. "By Odin's bones, you are alive." Elias stepped back. "Ulfric," he repeated. Others entered the room, men and women dressed in fur and leather with dirt on their faces and weapons in their hands. They stared at him like he had risen from the grave. "You fell at Bjornfell. We buried you with honor," a woman said, her eyes full of disbelief. "But now you stand before us. What does this mean?" Elias tried to speak again, but his mind raced. He remembered walking home from work in his world. He had stopped to help a man on the street. Then darkness, and now this. He looked into a polished metal shield that leaned against the wall. The face that stared back wasn't his. It was the face of a warrior, thick beard, scars across his cheek, and eyes like fire. Elias shook his head. "This isn't real," he whispered. But the cold wind, the smell of smoke, the weight of the axe at his waist, it was all too real. A small boy stepped forward, his eyes wide with hope. "Are you here to lead us again, Ulfric? Will you protect the village from the raiders?" Elias looked down at the boy, speechless. What kind of man was this Ulfric? A voice in the crowd whispered, "The gods have sent him back. He walks again." For a reason, Elias didn't know how to respond. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't know how to fight. He was just a man who worked at a bookstore, who believed in kindness, in peace, not war and blood. But they didn't see Elias. They saw Ulfric, and they expected a leader. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped closer. Her name, he learned quickly, was Freya. She had been Ulfric's closest friend, or something more. There was sadness in her eyes, mixed with fear and longing. She touched his hand gently. "The village is in danger. The mountain clan wants to take everything. Without you we have no chance. But you came back. The gods brought you back." Elias looked around at the faces watching him. Rough men with swords, tired women clutching their children. All of them were waiting for his answer. "I don't remember," Elias said carefully, "but I will try." Freya smiled faintly. "That's enough for now." Outside the storm roared louder, but inside the longhouse a strange calm settled. Elias didn't know how he had ended up here. He didn't know what this place truly was, or why the gods, or fate, had placed him in the body of a Viking berserker. But he knew this much: they needed help, and somehow, he was their only hope. The storm hadn't passed. If anything, it had grown worse. The longhouse shook with every gust of wind. Outside, trees bent and groaned, and thunder cracked like war drums from the gods. But inside the hall, all eyes stayed on the man they believed had returned from death, Ulfric the berserker. Yet inside that powerful body, Elias trembled. He stood near the fire, staring into the flames as questions burned in his mind. Who was this Ulfric before? A monster, a hero, both. And why was he here? Why had he, a peaceful, quiet man, been thrown into the body of a warrior, drenched in legend? Freya stood nearby, arms crossed. She hadn't spoken in minutes, only watching him with cautious eyes. Her face was worn, her cheek bruised. She looked like someone who had fought too many battles and lost too many friends. Elias turned toward her. "Can you tell me more about me?" he asked softly. She narrowed her eyes. "You don't remember?" He shook his head. Freya didn't gasp or accuse him of lying. She only stared a little longer before speaking. "You were feared, not just by enemies. Even the people here sometimes feared you. When you fought, you became someone else. You would scream to the sky like an animal, and your eyes, they turned wild, but you never hurt the innocent. You protected us." Elias swallowed hard. "That doesn't sound like me." "No," she said slowly. "It doesn't sound like the man standing before me now either." He lowered his head. "Maybe the gods didn't send Ulfric back. Maybe they sent someone else into his body." Freya tilted her head. "Then why you—" Elias didn't have an answer. Just then, the door creaked open. A young boy rushed in, soaked in rain, his bare feet muddy. "They're here," he cried. "The mountain clan. They're at the north edge of the village." People inside the longhouse stood quickly. Some grabbed axes. Others looked to Ulfric, or rather, Elias, for direction. Freya turned to him. "What will you do?" His hands trembled. He'd never held a real weapon before. The closest he'd come was holding a prop sword in a Halloween costume. And now people looked to him to protect them from raiders, murderers. Come, she said quickly. If you can't lead, at least watch. You need to understand what they're capable of. Elias followed. Heart racing, they ran through the mud, the icy rain lashing at their faces. The village wasn't large, maybe 30 homes, all made of timber and thatch. The people were poor, but they were proud. Fires burned in pits outside the homes, even during the storm. And small children hid behind barrels as warriors prepared for battle. Elias stopped at a hill overlooking the northern edge. What he saw made his breath catch. 5 men on horseback, wearing thick armor made of leather and bone, had entered the village fields. Behind them were at least 24 more warriors with axes, spears, and cruel smiles. That they were laughing, shouting insults, tossing torches into piles of hay. A small girl screamed as a warrior grabbed her arm. Elias froze. Do something, Freya whispered. Her voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. He looked at the axe strapped to his waist. It felt foreign, heavy. He had never hurt anyone in his life. But then he saw the man shove the child to the ground. Something deep inside Elias stirred. Not anger, not rage, but fire. A fire made of justice, of the need to protect. He stepped forward. Slowly, the villagers behind him stopped what they were doing. Some dropped their weapons. Others held their breath. The raiders saw him. One of them laughed. Look who crawled out of his grave. The leader said, Ulfric, the mad dog, returns. Elias didn't answer. He just walked. As he stepped closer, the wind howled louder, and the villagers lit torches behind him. His shadow stretched across the muddy ground. The raiders looked at each other uneasily. He reached the center of the field. The leader rode forward. Come to die again, he sneered. Elias raised his axe but didn't swing. He looked at the man calmly and said, Let the child go. The man chuckled. Or what? You'll scream at me like the old Ulfric. I'm not afraid of ghosts. Elias took another step forward. The leader moved to grab the girl again, but Elias acted. He didn't remember training, he didn't remember how to fight. But Ulfric's body did. With one powerful motion, he swung the axe not to kill, but to knock the man off his horse. The leader crashed to the ground, mud flying. The girl ran. The other raiders hesitated. They hadn't expected him to move like that. Elias looked at them with steady eyes. I don't want to kill, he said, but I will not let you harm anyone else. The silence was heavy. And then, slowly, the raiders backed away. They picked up their leader and retreated, shouting curses but making no further attack. The villagers ran to Elias, cheering. Some clapped his shoulders, others bowed. Freya reached him last. Her eyes were wide. You didn't kill, she said. Ulfric would have. I'm not Ulfric, Elias whispered, but maybe. I'm exactly what this village needs. And, as the storm finally began to fade, a new kind of light began to rise in the hearts of those who had watched a man become a protector, not by bloodshed, but by courage. The storm had passed, but the village remained soaked, not just in rain, but in silence. That strange kind of quiet that only comes after something sacred or terrifying has happened. Elias sat alone beneath the old ash tree at the center of the village. It was massive, ancient, its gnarled roots crawling over the earth like the fingers of some sleeping god. They said it was the tree Ulfric swore his first blood oath under, a place where warriors came to find courage or forgiveness. But Elias wasn't looking for either. Not yet. He was trying to understand who he was becoming. The people still called him Ulfric. They still bowed when he passed. Children peeked at him from behind barrels, wide-eyed and whispering, but they didn't fear him now. They watched him with something new, hope. He didn't feel like a warrior. Inside, he still felt like a man who shelved books for a living, a man who gave spare change to the homeless and listened to podcasts about kindness and the mind. But that man no longer existed, and the world he was now part of needed something else. Footsteps approached from behind. Heavy, careful, still sitting like a monk, came Freya's voice. She dropped a cloth-wrapped bundle beside him, bread, dried meat, and a flask of water. She sat next to him, knees drawn to her chest. I don't know what I'm doing, Elias said honestly. That makes 2 of us, she replied. The 2 sat in silence for a while. Finally he turned to her. Why did they fear Ulfric? Freya hesitated. Because when he fought, it was like a storm had taken over his soul. He didn't stop. Not until blood was spilled. Friend or enemy, it didn't matter if they stood in his way. Elias frowned. So, he was a monster? No, she said quickly. He was a weapon, made by grief, shaped by war. His father was burned alive. His mother starved. He had no room for softness, only revenge. And you? Elias asked. What were you to him? Freya looked up at the ash tree. He saved me once. From raiders. I was just a girl. My father had been killed. Ulfric arrived too late to stop them, but not too late to make them pay. After that I followed him, fought beside him, tried to remind him he was still human. She looked at Elias now, but he never listened. Not really, until he did. Flock of birds flew overhead. The sky was clearing. Sunlight broke through the clouds in pale golden beams. Elias closed his eyes. I don't want to be a weapon, he whispered. Freya nodded. Then be something stronger. Elias opened his eyes slowly. What's stronger than a weapon? He asked a healer. She said, a protector. A voice that doesn't shout but is still heard. He didn't know how to answer that, not yet. Just then, a young boy, the same one who had fetched them during the raid, came running across the muddy field. Ulfric, Freya, the council is calling for you. Freya groaned. Let me guess. They want to fight. Elias stood slowly, wiping dirt from his hands. Let's find out. The council hall was nothing like he expected. It was built into a hillside, half buried, its walls decorated with shields from fallen warriors. Inside sat 6 elders, old, feathered men with deep lines on their faces and eyes like sharpened stones. They watched Elias enter with cautious interest. The leader, Joran, stood. You are not the Ulfric we knew, he said plainly, but you wear his skin. You swing his axe. And yesterday you saved this village with no blood spilled. I didn't save it, Elias replied. I simply did what anyone should do. Yet none of us did, the elder said, unblinking. And that is why we need you. Another elder spoke. The mountain clan will return with more men. They expected a berserker. Instead, they found something else. Something they don't yet understand that may work in our favor. Or it may get us all killed. Elias looked around. What are you asking of me? To lead, Joran said. But not as Ulfric the berserker as what you are now. And if I refuse, Freya stepped beside him, then the village has no chance. Elias looked at the worn hands of the elders, the fear behind their stone-like faces. These were not men drunk on war. They were tired, scared. He turned toward the hearth in the center of the room where a small fire burned low. He thought of the ash tree. Then, slowly, he knelt before the fire and spoke. I don't promise blood, he said. I don't promise to be the man you remember. But I do promise this. I will stand between this village and death. I will build, not destroy. I will protect, not conquer. Silence filled the hall. Then Jorn said quietly, then let it be known a new Ulfric has risen, not born from war, but from fire. Later that night, Ilias stood again beneath the ash tree, alone, but not afraid. He took the axe from his waist and pressed its blade into the soil. I swear, he whispered, to use this only when no other path remains. And the wind, as if hearing his vow, rustled the branches above. Somewhere in the village, a baby cried. Somewhere else, an old man laughed. Life continued, for now, but something deeper had started. Not just in the village, but in Ilias's soul. Days passed after Elias made his vow beneath the ash tree, but peace, like smoke, was never meant to stay in one place too long. The village of Skallagrim breathed a little easier after the raiders had left. Children played again. The blacksmith's hammer rang in rhythm. Chickens returned to the yards, but behind every wooden door, people whispered the same question. How long before they come back? Elias felt it in the air, like a storm waiting, just beyond the hills. He spent his mornings walking through the village, speaking gently to those who once feared him. He helped the carpenter lift beams, watched the healer mend a baby's fever, and even laughed with the children chasing goats near the well. Each time someone called him Ulfric, it still sounded foreign. But with every kind act, every soft answer, Elias built something stronger than fear. He built trust. Still, every night he returned to the ash tree and stared toward the mountains. Waiting. And one cold dawn they came. It began with smoke on the northern horizon, a dark twisting column rising into the pale sky. Freya spotted it first as she sharpened a spear on her porch. She dropped the weapon. Elias, she whispered, they've set fire to the forest. By midday, the mountain clan reached the outer farms. They didn't wait this time. They didn't shout warnings or throw insults. They came like wolves, silent, hungry, and organized. A farmer ran screaming into the village square. His clothes were burned, his face cut. They took the children. He gasped, my sons. They took them. The village erupted in cries and panic. Jourund. The elder stood on a barrel and raised his voice. 2 arms, we fight today or we fall forever. Freya ran to Elias, who had been helping repair a fishing net near the river. Her eyes were wild. They didn't come to scare us this time. They came to break us. Elias stood slowly. This time, he didn't hesitate. Gather everyone in the square, he said. All of them, not just the warriors. Freya blinked. Why? Because this fight isn't just about swords anymore, he said softly. It's about who we are. The entire village gathered in the square under the growing shadow of the smoke. The mountain clan was less than an hour away now. The air already tasted of ash and hate. Elias stood on the stone steps of the well and looked at the faces around him. Old women, young boys, farmers, blacksmiths, widows, none of them were trained soldiers, and yet all of them were ready to fight because they had no choice. But Elias saw something else in their eyes. A question. Are we just waiting to die? He raised his voice. Listen to me, he said. I know you still see Ulfric in this body, but I am not him. Murmurs. I was not born in your village. I was not raised in blood or fire, but I see something here that your enemies don't. He pointed at the crowd. You together. He stepped down, walked among them. They think we are weak, that because we don't match their numbers we'll fall, but they don't understand what makes a home strong. He stopped beside the boy who had once fetched him from the storm. This boy has courage. He ran into danger to warn us. He turned to an old man with a missing arm. This man taught others how to use a sword again, even with one hand. He pointed to a mother cradling a baby. This woman stayed when she could have fled. That is bravery. Elias stepped back up to the well. We don't need to match their weapons. We need to match their hate with unity. Then he said the words that changed everything. We won't wait for them to destroy us. We meet them at the edge of the forest. Gasps, we take back the children. We take back our land, but we fight not with rage, not like beasts. We fight with purpose, with protection in our hearts. We fight because we must live, not because we want them dead. And that day, the village of Skallagrim chose something new. They didn't become berserkers, they became guardians. The sun was low when they reached the edge of the trees. The forest was already burning. Not wildly but carefully, the mountain clan had set fire to small rings of trees, hoping to herd villagers like frightened deer. Elias ordered buckets of water passed hand to hand. He placed elderly villagers and children in safe pockets behind large stones. He had Freya organize the fastest men into a rescue team. The plan wasn't to destroy the raiders, it was to save the captured. Elias walked into the burning edge of the forest alone, axe strapped across his back, hands open. When he appeared through the smoke, the raiders laughed. Well, well, said the same leader who had mocked him before. Back again, ghost man. I've come for the children, Elias said calmly. The man sneered. And you thought walking in like a lamb would make us hand them over? Elias took one step forward. No, I came to offer you a choice. The raiders chuckled. A few drew their swords, but Elias raised his voice. You let the children go, you leave our lands, and we will not follow. You'll live another day. The leader spat on the ground. And if we say no, Elias's eyes narrowed. Then the people you think are weak will remind you what true strength is. And behind him the entire village stepped from the trees. Mothers with farming tools, grandfathers with walking sticks turned into spears, young boys holding shields, blacksmiths with hammers, hunters with bows. They didn't roar, they stood, silent, side by side, unshaken. And the raiders saw something terrifying in that unity. They saw people who had nothing left to lose and everything worth defending. The mountain clan hesitated. One of them, a young raider, dropped his sword. Another backed away slowly. And finally, the leader cursed loudly and shouted, "This isn't worth it." He shoved the children forward. "Take your brats." And like smoke in the wind, they disappeared into the forest. Retreating into the mountains, Freya ran forward and scooped the children into her arms. The village cheered, but Elias simply stood there, watching the fire. Freya approached him, still holding one of the small boys who had been taken. "You did it," she said. "No," Elias whispered. "We did it." And that night, when the fires were put out and the children returned to their beds, the village didn't celebrate with drinking or songs. They sat quietly, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars, because they had discovered something far greater than survival. They had discovered the power of standing together, not through fear, not through violence, but through something rarer in this world than war. Hope. The village slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Children who had been kidnapped clung to their mothers. Warriors who hadn't believed in second chances now sat beside those they once feared. The moon hung low, gentle and golden, casting its light over roofs patched with hay and walls mended with care. But Elias could not sleep. He stood shirtless in the cold, steam rising from his skin, staring at the reflection in the still water of the river. His reflection did not comfort him, a face not his own, a body carved from brutality. The image shimmered with each ripple, as if rejecting him, mocking him. Freya found him there. She said nothing at first, only stood beside him with a small lantern flickering between them. The silence between them had grown familiar, not cold, but full, like the air before a storm. "You haven't slept," she said. Elias shook his head. "How could I?" Freya studied his face. "The village is safe. You've done what many thought was impossible." He turned toward her, voice low. "I'm not afraid of the mountain clan anymore, Freya. I'm afraid of him, Ulfric," she asked. He nodded. "Every time I close my eyes I feel something inside me shift," he said. "Not just memory. Something darker, like I'm standing at the edge of something deep and angry it wants out." Freya's voice softened. "Maybe it's time you learn the truth." That night, Freya led him beyond the village, through a narrow trail hidden between tall pines. The wind was quiet. The forest listened. They reached a clearing where the ground had been disturbed. Large stones circled with runes and black ash at the center. "A burial ground. This is where we burned him," Freya said. Elias felt a strange pull in his chest, a tightness. He stepped forward. "There was no body left," she added. "Only broken pieces of armor, and the war paint he wore during battle. The rest was gone." She knelt beside one of the stones and ran her fingers over a rune. "Before he died, Ulfric wrote something here. Not many knew he could even write." Elias crouched beside her. The rune symbols glowed faintly in the moonlight. "What do they say?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Forgive me, mother." The words hit Elias like a spear through the ribs. He looked up sharply. "What? That happened to her?" Freya looked away. She was the one person Ulfric ever loved, she said. After raiders took his father, it was just him and his mother. She was kind, too kind for this world. One day she tried to stop Ulfric from taking revenge on a village that had betrayed his father. Freya paused. She stood in front of him and he pushed her. Elias closed his eyes. The image came uninvited, a younger Ulfric, wild with rage, shoving a woman aside, and hearing the sickening crack of bone against stone. She died. Instantly, Freya said. Silence wrapped around them like a cloak of snow. He never spoke of it again. She continued. But it changed him. That night he painted his face with ash and swore to become death itself. That's when the Berserker was born. Elias stood, heart racing. That rage, it's still in here, he said, placing a hand on his chest. It's like I can feel it moving in my blood. Freya rose slowly. Then maybe the gods gave you this body not to use it, but to heal it. He looked into her eyes. And what if I can't? Then you'll fall like Ulfric did, she whispered. But I don't believe that's how your story ends. The next day, something strange began happening in the village. Elders who once avoided Elias now came to speak with him, not about war, but about peace. A farmer asked for help rebuilding his barn. A young girl asked if he could teach her how to throw a spear the kind way. Elias didn't understand the question at first. The kind way. The girl nodded. Like you did, when you saved my brother without hurting the bad man. Elias smiled for the first time in days. He knelt beside her and placed a wooden stick in her hand. Then I'll show you. But not everyone was pleased. A man named Skorri, once Ulfric's right hand in war, confronted Elias near the edge of the forest. Skorri was tall, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that never blinked. You make this village soft, he growled. Elias didn't flinch. No, I make it stronger. Skorri's hand twitched near his sword. You've dishonored Ulfric's name. This village was feared. Now we teach children how to throw sticks. Elias stepped forward. What were we before fear, Skorri? Just empty fire. Now we are something more. Skorri bared his teeth. You're not Ulfric. No, Elias said calmly. I'm better. The older warrior spit in the dirt and walked away. That night someone painted blood on Ilias's door. A warning. Freya was furious. They want the old Ulfric back, she said. They don't see what's growing here. Elias looked at the red smear calmly. They will or they won't, but I didn't come back to be a shadow. Freya stared at him. Then don't let the ghost inside you win. Later, Elias returned, alone to the burial ground. He knelt beside the stone where Ulfric had scratched his final words. Forgive me, mother, he whispered into the earth. I don't know if I'm meant to be your redemption or just a stranger in your skin, but I'll carry you the rest of the way. Suddenly, the wind rose. The ash tree in the distance groaned, and the moon passed behind clouds dotted for the first time. Ilias felt something strange, a weight lifting the rage that burned in his bones. Softened, not gone but quiet. The ghost, perhaps, had heard him. The first snow came earlier than expected. Flakes drifted gently from the gray sky, coating the rooftops in soft white. The fields turned quiet under the new blanket, and smoke from chimneys curled lazily into the cold air. But beneath the silence, something stirred. It was not fear. Not anymore. It was something new. Something warmer. Hope. Elias stood in the center of the training field, surrounded by villagers, but these were not soldiers. They were teenagers, elders, farmers, and 3 children barely past their 10th year. They held wooden swords. Some gripped them with shaking hands, others with fire in their eyes, and all of them looked to Elias for guidance. You don't need to be strong, he said, his voice calm. You need to be steady. A storm cannot knock down a tree with deep roots. Small boy at the edge of the group frowned. His name was Leaf. 10 years old, thin as a stick, eyes like flint. He didn't speak much, but the way he moved said everything. He didn't want to defend, he wanted to strike. Elias watched him closely. All right, he continued, picking up a wooden staff. Come at me. The children hesitated, but Leaf stepped forward. Without warning, the boy swung his wooden blade fast and wild, aiming for Elias's knees. The crowd gasped, but Elias calmly stepped back, blocked the strike with a clean motion, and gently tapped Leaf's shoulder. You're fast, Elias said, handing the boy back his weapon. Leaf's jaw tightened. I don't want to block. I want to win. Elias knelt, eye to eye with him. And what does winning mean to you? Leaf looked away, making sure they never come back. Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. If that's your goal, then you must learn to be patient. Victory isn't always about striking first. Sometimes it's about standing your ground when the world tries to break you. Leaf didn't answer, but he stayed. That night, Elias found Freya outside the longhouse, brushing snow from the benches. Do you know about the boy? He asked. She nodded. Leaf, his father was killed during the last raid. Mother disappeared. He's been raised by his uncles. Elias froze. The same Skorri who spat in the dirt and wanted Ulfric reborn through violence. That explains the anger, Elias murmured. Freya looked at him. Can you reach him? I have to, Elias replied. Because if I don't, Skorri will date the next morning. Elias woke to find Leaf waiting outside his door, holding 2 wooden blades. He said nothing, just offered one forward. Elias smiled and took it. They trained for hours, not in battle, but in breath, in balance, in calm. Each time Leif grew frustrated, Elias reminded him, your enemy wants you angry. Anger clouds your judgment. Breathe. For days, the same rhythm followed. Strike, block, breathe, strike, block, breathe, and slowly, the boy's movements changed. He became sharper, but not cruel, quicker but not reckless. Villagers began to watch, mothers nodded. Old warriors whispered Ulfric, but different. But peace is fragile in a world still haunted by war, and it shattered one night when a scream echoed through the village. Elias rushed to the edge of the square and found an old woman crying. Her cart had been destroyed, her storage hut set ablaze. No wolves did this, one man said. This was human. A mark had been carved into the burning wood, an old war rune, Ulfric's symbol. Elias's hands clenched. Who would do this? And then a voice came from behind. Who else? Skorri stepped forward, arms crossed. You've made us weak. Someone is reminding us of who we were. That was never strength, Elias snapped. It was fear. And we're done living in fear, Skorri laughed. Then what happens when raiders come again? You'll teach them poetry, or breathe at them until they leave. I'll protect this village with everything I am, Elias said firmly, but I will not become the monster they expect. He stepped forward, and I will not let you poison the boy. Skorri's eyes narrowed. You mean Leif? The crowd fell silent. He's Ulfric's blood, Skorri said coldly. You didn't know that, did you? The wind stopped. Elias blinked. What? Skorri stepped closer. Ulfric had a son, born from a woman he never named. He left the child with his brother before his final battle. The woman vanished. That boy... is Leif. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elias staggered back, heart thundering. Leif, Ulfric's son. Skorri smiled darkly. And that boy will grow into the real warrior this village needs, whether you like it or not. Later, Elias found Leif sitting near the river, legs in the snow, staring at the frozen water. Is it true? The boy asked without turning. Elias sat beside him. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know. Leif's voice broke. They say he was a monster. Elias hesitated. He was lost, hurt, angry. But even he left a message in the earth asking for forgiveness. The boy looked up, eyes glistening. Then why do I feel this fire inside me? Why do I want to hurt the ones who hurt us? Elias placed a hand over Leif's. Because you're human, but you have a choice. You can be the end of his story or the beginning of something new. Leif didn't speak, but he leaned against Elias. And that was enough. The next day, Elias gathered the villagers again. He told them the truth about Ulfric's past, about the fire in his bones, about the vow he made not to let it rise again. Ulfric's strength wasn't in his rage, Elias said. It was in what he built after he fell. This village, this peace. Then he placed a wooden sword in Leif's hand and said, this boy is not Ulfric. He is something better. And the people, those who once feared the name, cheered, because the boy smiled. And for the first time, Elias saw no rage in his eyes, only light. The sun refused to rise that morning. Instead, a dense fog clung to the village like a warning, thick, pale, and cold. It muffled sound. It distorted shape. It made even the familiar seem strange. Elias stood on the watchtower above the village gates, staring into the gray, unmoving wall of mist. Something was coming. He could feel it. Freya joined him moments later, cloak tight around her shoulders, her expression hard. She had barely slept in days. Neither had he. A rider had arrived in the night, a scout from a nearby trading post, his face pale, his voice trembling. There's a banner moving through the valley, the man had whispered. An old one, black cloth, red fist, torn edges. Freya had gasped when she heard it. Now she spoke the words again aloud, voice low and bitter. The banner of Sigurd the Red. Elias didn't recognize the name, but Freya's voice trembled when she said it again. Ulfric's blood brother in war, the last of his warlords. The man who burned Skelbay to ash and claimed the bones as a throne. Elias's fingers tightened around the wooden beam. Why now? He asked. Why return after all these years? Freya looked at him. Because he believes Ulfric is alive, and he wants to join him or kill him. Elias turned to her. He won't find either because I am not Ulfric. No, she said slowly. But the world doesn't care who you are now. It only sees the face. By noon, the fog began to lift, and with it came the sight of riders, a long line of them, dark as crows on the snow-dusted horizon. And at the front, a tall man wrapped in a black wolf's pelt, his banner dragging behind him like a scar on the earth. His eyes burned even at a distance. Sigvard. He stopped just beyond arrow range and raised a single hand. Elias descended the tower. I will go alone, he said. Freya grabbed his arm. You don't even know what he wants. I know exactly what he wants, Elias replied. He wants the ghost. The warlord sat upon a horse with steel-plated hooves. His beard was red, long, and braided with bones. His left eye was gone, replaced with an iron disc shaped like a serpent. But when Elias approached, Sigurd dismounted and dropped to one knee. My brother, he growled. Elias froze. Sigurd stood slowly, towering. They said you died. He muttered. I buried your blade myself, and yet here you stand. The gods must have plans for us still. I'm not who you remember, Elias said carefully. Sigvard's eyes narrowed. You don't wear war paint. You don't carry the axe. Why? Because Ulfric died. I am what remains, and I will not walk that road again. Sigvard laughed. Once a bitter sound. We bathed the earth in fire. You and I, you can't wash that out with snow and kindness. I'm not trying to erase the past, Elias replied. I'm trying to protect what it never could. Peace. Sigvard stepped closer. Peace is for sheep. You taught me that. No, Elias said firmly. I taught you rage. Because I didn't know any better. Silence fell. Then Sigvard growled. If you won't lead, then I will. You'll do so alone, Elias replied. This village won't follow you. Then I'll take it from you. He turned and remounted. You have 3 days, he called over his shoulder, to return to who you were, or I will come with fire and blade, and remind this land what Ulfric once stood for. Back in the village, Elias stood before the council and told them everything. Some wept, others shouted. We cannot survive an army, one man cried. Even if we fight together, they outnumber us 5 to 1. Freya's voice cut through the panic. We can't match their strength, but we can prepare, and we have something they don't, heart. And a leader who won't become a monster to win, Elias added. He turned to the villagers. We will not run, we will not bow, but we also will not become the very thing we fear. The people nodded. They trusted him now, not because he had Ulfric's strength but because he chose not to use it in hate. That night, Elias found Leif training alone under the ash tree. The boy moved with grace now, controlled, powerful, longer wild. But his eyes, they held something deeper than before. A question you heard, Elias asked gently. Leif nodded. They say he fought beside my father, that he was like an uncle to me. He was, Elias said honestly. But he isn't what you need. Leif turned, blade tight in his grip. Then what do I need? Elias took a breath. You need to know that you are not bound by blood. You don't have to become a warrior to be strong. You don't have to lead like Ulfric. But I want to help, the boy said. Then help by being better, Elias said. Help by standing firm when fear wants you to run. Help by protecting, without becoming a destroyer. Leif lowered his sword. Or try. Over the next 2 days the village became a fortress of spirit. Barricades were raised not to trap fear, but to hold unity. Farms were emptied of tools. Spears were made. Traps were dug. And Elias, he trained not just hands but hearts. He reminded the people of what they had saved, their homes, their dignity, their future. But as the third night fell, the drums began. Low, slow, echoing through the hills. Sigvard was coming, and he was not coming to talk. The night was still, not quiet, still. As if even the stars held their breath. The villagers stood along the northern ridge, cloaked in silence, gripping whatever they could use, spears, farming tools, axes carved from tree limbs. There were no chants, no war drums, just steady hearts waiting for the storm. Ilias stood at the front, Leif beside him. The boy said nothing, but Ilias could feel the tension in his shoulders. Not fear, not any more conviction. Behind them Freya moved like a shadow, relaying final instructions to the archers hidden in the trees. From the valley below came the sound of marching, slow, deliberate, brutal. Then the first torch lit the darkness, and another, until the entire horizon glowed red with fire and menace. Sigvard had arrived, and he had brought not just warriors but wolves, siege carts, and a banner soaked in the blood of old oaths. He rode to the front, his black wolfskin cloak flapping like wings, his iron eye gleaming in the firelight. He bellowed, "One last chance, ride with me. Let this world know fear again." Elias stepped forward, but this time he wore no armor. He wore a long plain cloak. His axe was strapped to his back unused. "I told you," Elias called. "Ulfric is gone." Sigvard's smile twisted. "Then you die a coward." He raised his arm. The horde surged, and the battle began. The ground shook beneath their boots. Sigvard's men charged like beasts, screaming war cries that once made cities tremble. Their blades glowed red in the torchlight, and their fury rolled like thunder. But the villagers did not run. They stood in rows, side by side, farmers, mothers, hunters, smiths. And at their front stood Elias. He didn't shout, he whispered, "Steady." The first clash was brutal. Sparks flew as steel met steel, but the villagers held because they were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for each other, for the homes behind them, for the children sleeping with hope in their hearts for a tomorrow not ruled by rage. Elias moved through the chaos like a calm storm, disarming, not killing, redirecting, not breaking. He struck only when necessary, guiding others, saving lives. And then he saw Sigvard. The warlord was cutting through lines with terrifying strength, laughing like a man who had never been wounded. Blood soaked his blade. His iron eye searched and found Elias. Their eyes met. Sigvard charged. Their weapons clashed with a sound that split the air. Elias grunted, barely holding ground as the brute force of the warlord slammed into him. "You've grown soft." Sigvard spat, swinging again. "No," Elias whispered, parrying. "I've grown free." The duel was vicious. But Elias didn't fight like Ulfric. He fought like himself, focused, patient, alive. And Sigvard couldn't understand it. You could crush me, the warlord roared. I remember your rage. Where is it? Buried, Elias said, pushing back. With everything it destroyed. Sigvard howled and struck, but Elias stepped aside, using the warlord's momentum to knock him off balance. The warlord fell. But before Elias could speak, Sigvard reached into his cloak and pulled a knife, throwing it at Leif. Elias turned too late. The blade flew straight toward the boy until Freya stepped in the way. The knife struck her shoulder. She dropped. Ilias's heart stopped. No, he roared, something inside him breaking. He ran to her side as Leif pulled her back behind a shield. I'm all right, she gasped, barely conscious. Protect him. Elias stood slowly, and for a moment, just a moment, the old fire flickered. The ghost stirred. But Elias looked down at Freya and remembered why he came back. He turned, raised his hand to the villagers. Do not kill, he shouted. Push them back, let them flee, but do not become them. And somehow, in the middle of war, they listened. The villagers surged, not with hatred but unity. They pushed Sigvard's warriors back, shield by shield, line by line, and when the warlord rose, bleeding and beaten, he found Elias standing over him, weapon lowered. Finish. It's Sigvard spat. But Elias shook his head. No, you'll let me live. No, Elias said again. I'll let you choose. The same choice I was given. Sigvard blinked. What choice? Elias crouched. Become something more, or stay in the dark. The war is over. Sigvard, you're the only one still fighting. Sigvard lay there, stunned. And slowly, he lowered his weapon. By dawn, the invaders had fled. Sigvard limped into the mountains alone. The villagers tended their wounded. The fires were put out and Leif stood beside Elias, holding Freya's hand, tears in his eyes. She lived, the healer said. Strong woman, Elias smiled, then knelt before Leif. You stood your ground, he said softly. You didn't run. You protected. Leif nodded. Like you taught me. No, Elias replied. Like you already knew. That night, the village gathered under the ash tree. Candles were lit, not in mourning. In gratitude, Elias stood before them, humbled. I cannot promise no more battles will come, he said. But I can promise you this, we will face them, together. As we are. Not as monsters. Not as ghosts, but as people. He looked at Leif. And smiled. The future isn't born from rage. It's born from what we choose today. Winter wrapped the village in white silence. The snow had fallen heavy in the night, covering the land like a clean slate, soft, pure, untouched. It muffled footsteps, hushed voices, and made even the tallest warriors walk softly. But within that silence, something had begun to stir. Not danger. Reckoning that it had been a week since the battle. The wounded were healing. The walls had been rebuilt, stronger, and the people, once broken by fear, now walked with lifted heads. But Elias felt it in his chest like a whisper between heartbeats. Something unfinished. Something waiting. He spent the early mornings under the ash tree now. Eyes closed, hands on the cold roots, listening not to the wind, but to something deeper, older. The tree, villagers said, had been here before even Ulfric. It had watched births, wars, and deaths, and held memories in its bark that morning. Leif joined him. The boy didn't speak. He just sat beside Elias and breathed in the frost-kissed air. They keep asking me questions, Leif said quietly. Elias opened his eyes. What kind? About leading, about fighting, about what my father would have done. Elias turned to him. And what do you tell them? Leif looked down. That I don't know. That's the best answer, Elias said. Leaders who pretend to know everything are the most dangerous. Leif traced a finger in the snow. Do you think my father ever regretted anything? Elias looked at the branches above. Yes, he said. Then why didn't he change? Elias hesitated, then answered softly. Because sometimes, by the time we see the truth, it's already buried under too much blood. Leif didn't reply. They sat in silence, and then Elias spoke again, more to the air than to the boy. I think it's time I stop hiding. That afternoon, Elias walked to the Elders' Circle, a place where only those over 50 winters could sit. The council, surprised to see him approach alone, stood as he entered the stone ring. Jourund, the eldest, raised an eyebrow. You've come to speak truth, haven't you? Elias nodded. I am not Ulfric. The elders didn't speak. They waited. I may wear his face. I may carry his voice. But I am not the man who led your wars. I came from somewhere else, a place you wouldn't understand. I woke in this body, knowing nothing of this land, this name, or your pain. A few murmurs rippled, but none dared interrupt. I tried to reject it, Elias continued. I tried to escape the ghost in my bones. But this body was not given back to me by accident. It was given back to offer this village one more chance, not to become great, but to become good. Gerard's eyes were sharp. Then who are you, truly? Elias looked down at his hands, large, rough, powerful, the hands of a killer, once, but now, they trembled for peace. My name was Elias, he said, and that name still lives inside me. The wind picked up, tossing snow into the circle like falling ash. An elder woman stepped forward. You are not who we buried, but you are who saved us. Jorand nodded slowly, then let the old name rest. and let the man before us be honored, not as Ulfric and not as a ghost, but as Elias of Skallagrim. The circle echoed the name, and for the first time Elias felt whole. That night Leif came to him in the longhouse, holding something wrapped in cloth. I found this, the boy said, in the forest, near the burial ground. Elias opened the cloth slowly. Inside was a blade, not Ulfric's axe, something different. The metal was black as night, but it shimmered faintly, runes carved along the edge in a language older than Viking tongue. Elias frowned. This isn't from here. Leif nodded. The runes, one of the elders said, it's the language of seers. On the hilt was a word, only one. Elias. The man nearly dropped the blade. Leif stared. You never told me your name before. I never told anyone, Elias whispered. Then why is it here? Elias looked into the fire. I think I was never meant to stay. Leif stepped back. What do you mean? Elias touched the blade gently. My time here is ending. No, the boy shouted. You can't leave. You made this place what it is. You made me who I am. Elias crouched, hands on Leif's shoulders. I was given a second chance not to save the world, but to prepare it for someone else. Leif's eyes filled with tears. I'm not ready. Yes, Elias whispered, smiling. You are. They embraced for a long time. Then Elias handed him the blade. This belongs to you now. The next morning the ash tree was covered in frost, and Elias was gone. No footprints, no trail. Just the sword Leif carried, and the memory of a man who changed the world without swinging it. The fire crackled softly in the great hall of Skallagrim. Snow tapped gently against the windows, and the scent of roasted root vegetables and cedarwood filled the warm air. Children sat cross-legged on fur rugs, wide-eyed, clutching cups of warm goat's milk as the old man spoke. His voice was calm but heavy, like the mountain after a storm. His name was Leif Ironroot, though no one called him that anymore. They called him the Stillblade, the leader who had never raised his weapon in hate. And now, with his grey beard braided and the ancient sword of Elias resting against the chair beside him, Leif told the story one final time. It was the winter. The gods themselves stood still. He said softly, when a man not born of our world came to us, not with fire, not with fury, but with stillness in his heart. He looked at the children. He wore the face of a feared warrior, a name that once made men tremble. But inside, he was gentle, confused, lost and still. He saved us. One boy raised a hand. Was he really from another world? Leif smiled faintly. Yes, he was not Ulfric. He was not from the mountain clans. He came from a place with no axes, no war cries, a place with books, with kindness. Another child asked, did he defeat Sigurd the Red with magic? No, Leif said. He defeated him with mercy. A hush fell over the room. Leif leaned closer to the fire. He could have become the monster they feared. He had the body of a killer, the mind of a stranger. But he chose something harder. The room leaned in. He chose to forgive. When the children were taken to bed, and the hall grew quiet, Leif remained. He ran his fingers along the hilt of the black, ruined sword. The blade had never spilled a drop of blood. It had been passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of Elias, of the man who stood still. Freya entered quietly, older now, but just as fierce. Her limp was worse in the cold, but her spirit remained untouched. They're still listening, she said, sitting beside him. They need to. Leif replied. The world has grown loud again. Freya nodded. Some say a war is brewing. In the east. Leif didn't flinch. Then let them come. We will remind them of the man who stood before a storm and refused to roar. They sat in silence. Then Freya asked, do you think he's still watching? Leif turned to the fire. He never left. Later that night, when even the stars had fallen asleep, Leif walked to the ash tree. It was larger now, towering. Its bark was marked by age, by offerings, by time itself. Leif knelt beside its roots and placed the sword down gently. You gave me more than a weapon, he whispered. You gave me a path. He looked up at the moon. You were not a warrior. You were a healer in armor, a soul that should have been broken, but wasn't. He reached into his cloak and pulled out something worn, a small piece of parchment, a page from a book Elias once carried in his pocket, back when he still thought he was dreaming. On it, faded but clear, were words that Elias once wrote with his trembling hand. The strongest man is not the one who strikes hardest, but the one who stands still when the world begs him to fall. Leif folded the page and buried it beneath the roots. I was once a boy who wanted to kill, he said. But you taught me how to live. In the spring they built a small stone altar beside the ash tree, not grand, not towering, but quiet. It had no statue, only a single engraved line. In two languages, the old tongue of Skallagrim, and the writing of Ilias's forgotten world, it said, he did not return to lead an army. He returned to remind us how to be human. That summer a traveler arrived at the edge of the village, clothed in grey, hair long, eyes gentle. He spoke little and asked for no coin. But when he saw the altar he smiled. When he read the words, he wept. And when the villagers asked his name he only said, Tell Leif, the one who stood still is proud. By the time they ran to fetch the old chieftain, the traveler was gone. but Leaf found a single feather resting on the stone, black, smooth, perfect, and tucked beneath it. A folded page, blank but warm in his hand. Years later, the blade still rests beneath the ash tree, not as a symbol of war but of choice, and in every corner of the valley, people tell stories of Elias, the man who could have burned the world, but chose to heal it instead.